So I recently saw Logan, and I was kind of fearful the praise would not match what I saw, but happy to report that the hype is very real. This is a very excellent story, very strong film, incredibly good storytelling, very strong performances, special effects, pacing, character work, everything is here. There are, however, a few little flaws, but again, they aren't too noticeable at first, but I did think about them, so I'm gonna have to give it a slightly lower grade, but it's still a very strong recommendation. I'm gonna give this an 8.25, and we're gonna see why. So, what is Logan? Essentially, this is where Wolverine is basically in his final days. Something has happened to his body where his powers are failing or they're weakening, and he's in a very vulnerable place. He doesn't have a lot of money. A lot of the X Men have been killed off or have died off. It's a little fuzzy, but basically, the X Men have declined. There are very few mutants anymore. Instead of a lot of mutants being in the world, they've been a declining population for a long, long time, and they're being actively hunted by the government. And Professor X is essentially disabled mentally. His brain and mind are losing cohesion. He can't really control his powers. So, all around, it's a very sad, pessimistic tale where Logan, Professor X, and Caliban, which I thought was a really great, interesting addition, basically have pulled together and trying to survive in a very brutal world. And Logan is tasked with a final kind of heroic mission, which of course he refuses at first, but then after a while, for money, he seems to adopt. But you can tell he wants to help, but he's been driven to the edge. He's just very nihilistic. He's very pessimistic. This is based on Old Man Logan, and I was able to read the comic while seeing this, and that was really helpful because it does take a few nods, but it does its own story. So this is really how an adaptation should be. It took the basic premise of that comic, but they are doing their own story, and it goes its own path. Very interesting rethinking of the characters we know from the other X-Men films, and a reinterpretation of the mythology and lore. And it's mixing a lot of genres. It's hard to even count them. It's the Western, it's kind of a neo noir. There's obviously even comedy here. Very horror. There's a very horror vibe to it. It's a lot of graphic scenes. If you're sensitive about blood, don't see this because there is a lot of bloodshed. That said, we now have to get to the bad parts, which is some of the plot twists, which I knew were coming, kind of fell flat for me. They don't really add up. They're somewhat contradictory. I don't even think they were necessary, but they wanted to provide this kind of conspiracy explanation as to what happened to the X-Men, what happened to all these mutants. And one of the things that kept bothering me is that in this future, even if you don't have mutant powers, you can get these kind of cybernetic enhancements that make you very powerful. And I just kept thinking to myself, why wouldn't Logan or some of the other mutants do that? Why wouldn't they just adopt cybernetic parts just to protect themselves? But they don't do that for some reason. That was very, very strange. Also, this doesn't really work with the canon because the way that Wolverine's powers fail just felt very, very forced. They could have just lowered his powers a little bit, but this is like a sharp decline, and that didn't quite feel right. Especially Logan is not stupid. He's often portrayed as a very brutal kind of person, but he's actually very intelligent. He would notice if his powers are declining, and he'd probably actively do something to arrest that decline or make up for it. But here it kind of feels kind of passive. I don't know if that was just the intention or the framework. A few question marks about the story itself. But again, overall, James Mangold and Hugh Jackman, I think, did an excellent job of being very, very secure in what they wanted to do and this very graphic, R-rated story. And for the most part, I think they succeeded. It has a lot of integrity. There are some moments I found slightly annoying, like how Patrick Stewart keeps cursing. That after a while felt like a gimmick. He needed to stop doing that. But again, it did make sense in this fictional story. So there are a few gimmicks and a few plot twists I thought didn't quite work, I think, as effectively as they wanted to. But overall, a very strong story. Very excellent. You will never be bored. I was even surprised how I felt about the girl who they're helping, who I thought at the beginning is just so annoying, and I usually don't like that kind of trope of the old man and the young girl being in the mentor thing, blah blah blah. But I thought it was mostly well done. I did feel something for her near the end, and I thought the conclusion was adequate. I kind of wish they went a little bit different direction. Again, this is a sad story, so I didn't have a problem with it being a sad ending, but I don't know. I think it could have left us with a little bit more hope. But I think for what it's doing, it's a very interesting story which mixes the religious and political symbolism pretty well within its narrative. If you don't like politics and or religious mythology, this will not be for you because it's not heavy-handed. I think it's well integrated, but if you just prefer a film that's fun action or just confined to being a horror splash fest with a lot of gore, this won't be for you. This is asking a lot of difficult questions about humanity, society, decline of the body, what are we going to be like in the future? How are we going to integrate technology with our everyday lives? It's asking a lot of deep, difficult questions, and it does try to provide some answers, but it does so in a very adult manner. Few flaws. It's not perfect. I thought some things didn't quite work the way it should have, but overall, happy to report, yes, Logan is probably one of the best films of the decade. Don't deny yourself. Please see this film.